The first Damocles conclave was merely the first step on the path of organizing the crusade. Dozen more meetings were held between members of the conclave, discussing details and specific plans of action. They shared information, contacts, even agents in order to ensure that the great wheels of the imperial administration will be pushed even a bit faster. Boultic Ottvar slept little during those weeks. The scale of the enemy and the preparations needed to bring them low were overwhelming. There was so much to do, and even 5 years he was given seemed like a blink of an eye compared to magnitude of the task before him. He was first to officially establish his new base of operations right where he was, on Agrellan. The Hive World was an important trade hub in the region and possessed many warplanes essential for trade and transport of goods between star systems. In mind of a radical inquisitor, those warplanes were one of the deciding factors if the crusade achieves success or not. After all, not all vessels in the Imperium use navigators. Many smaller trade and transport vessels use calculated jumps, using warplanes marked by the navigator houses to go from one place to another. Those small vessels, in their uncounted millions, were blood flowing through the veins of the Imperium. The very same vessels which would prove essential in keeping the crusade well supplied and ensuring quick arrival of reinforcements when and where they will be needed. If Damocles Gulf Crusade was to succeed, they will need a map of all navigable warplanes within Tau Empire's territory. With such a map, the threat of Crusade losing ships to the currents of the warp would be minimalized. What worth do dozens of Imperial Guard regiments or even companies of Adeptus Astartes have if they will get lost in the warp for the next 5 centuries? No, he could not allow it. He needed maps of all stable warplanes. He needed information about worlds on the path of the crusade, about Tau naval assets. He needed to transport his agents and spies onto rebellious worlds and preferably deep into Tau Empire territory itself. And he needed to find a way to capture some Xeno specimens without alarming the enemy. So many great tasks, and he couldn't do everything alone. For all his talents, he was just one man, and though his retinue was numerous, it wasn't nearly big enough for all of this. No, what he needed was to find someone experienced in exploring the unknown and not afraid of bending the rules here and there for their own benefit. Thankfully, Imperium of Man had such specialists, and many of them were frequent visitors to Agrellan. Rogue traders. Many major and minor dynasties operated in the region of the Damocles and Chrysis sectors, but 5 houses specifically got his attention. House Septrionadus, House Phalasson, House Mornvale, House Vorhais, and House Galadron. Each had their specialization that would prove useful. House Septrionadus was famous for their cartographers and navigators. There was no other rogue trader house in this region of the Imperium who could match their libraries of navigational data gathered and kept through millennia of loyal service. His sources indicated that House Septrionadus had even access to ancient maps of Damocles sector itself before the warp storm engulfed it in its entirety. While those maps were surely outdated by now, they could help find hidden worlds or passages for the Imperial vessels, not to mention help create precise and comprehensive maps of the region. House Phalasson was one of the younger rogue trader dynasties, but they have proven themselves tenacious explorers with no fear. They flew into the unknown, passing through uncertain pathways through the warp. They gained renown for rediscovering a dozen long-lost colonies and helped establish a dozen more. Their navigators were especially skilled in navigating the unknown and unmapped waters of the warp. Ottvar doubted if there was any other house that could be trusted in mapping new paths into the enemy territory. House Mornvale was the most secretive of all in the region. Ottvar had some proof that the house dealt with Xenos and lost tribes of humanity in secret, ensuring growing profits from those unseen trade deals. Their ships were known to be ancient and many times equipped with unorthodox equipment. Some of it was supposedly of Xenos origin. They were also the oldest of the rogue trader dynasties in this region of space, with their warrant of trade coming straight from the Emperor himself. And while they held a great amount of power and influence, they were known for their subtlety and secretive nature. He would be a fool to not recruit them to his cause. Knowledge was power after all, especially the secret kind. House Vorhaes was the most radical on his list. They were in equal way warriors, traders, and diplomats. His sources indicated that they've already established trade deals with the Tau and rebellious worlds. And while many would want to call them traitors, he knew House Vorhaes didn't sire fools. They were deadly strategists and had unmatched ability to maneuver through politics and warfare alike. Their bloodline sired many generals of the Imperial Guard, admirals of the Imperial Navy, and even few governors. It could be argued that only rogue trader house that could challenge Vorhaes in influence was Mornvale, which was millennia older. Their connections and influence could not be ignored, nor their skill in diplomacy and warfare. House Galadron was a tricky one. The head of their house fell to heresy and they lost their warrant of trade in 37th millennium, only to reclaim it 1,000 years later. House Galadron became a symbol of rebirth and redemption in Damocles and Crucis sectors. They were also the most religious of all dynasties and had the deepest connections to Ministorum. They had many preachers in their ranks, and their charisma was well known in the sector. With their agents in his palm, he could place seeds of rebellion and true faith on worlds that dared to rebel against the Emperor. With those 5 dynasties' support, he could begin the real work. With their manpower at his disposal, he could achieve far more than if he tried to do everything on his own. So, Boultic Ottvar sent his agents to each house, calling for their leaders to appear personally on Agrellan. All of them answered. 5 rogue traders, some of who considered each other rivals, met in quiet yet elegant spire of one of the hives. There, they were sworn to secrecy, and plans for a crusade were revealed to them. They were impressed, to say the least. The idea of one crusade clearly catching on. And then, Boultic Ottvar offered them a deal. They were to interact with the Tau Empire, mostly by trade. They were to explore and find the best paths for the crusade to take. They were to investigate the Xenos and help him in his investigation. In exchange, they would be granted total protection and lack of scrutiny in regards of their dealings with the Tau. They would get inquisitorial favor, and most importantly, when the dust settled after the crusade, they would get first pickings for colonies and chance to expand their mercantile empires. The conclave would ensure that they will have no competition from other dynasties that would try to get a piece of the pie. The reclaimed Damocles sector would be theirs for the taking. The rogue traders were more than interested. The negotiations took time, of course, the dynasties trying to place themselves in optimal position so that they could take the biggest piece of the mentioned pie and most of the credit and glory. Ottvar skillfully placed them within an agreement where they would cooperate without sabotaging each other's efforts, while keeping the healthy level of rivalry so that each house did their best to gain as much of his favor as possible. This agreement became to be known as Wayfinder Pact, a secret deal that was to ensure that Crusade won't be blind while striking at the Tau Empire. And while significant, it was just the beginning. Just as the rogue traders left, Ottvar turned his attention to less scrupulous organizations. Alliances of smugglers, corsairs, pirates, slavers, and other scum. Those who are commonly known as cold traders. On the long list of criminal organizations, only 2 were marked to be of any real use to the Inquisition: the Eclipse Syndicate and Obsidian Exchange. The Eclipse Syndicate operated near civilized world of Arturia, right on the doorstep of Grisia subsector, which was of interest to the Crusade. They were known for their corsair and pirate members, who would be of some use to the Inquisition. The Obsidian Exchange had its origins on the space stations above Obsidianus, a mining world that stood right next to the great warp storm that engulfed the Damocles sector. Their influence reached all the way to civilized world of Zebharia, but most importantly, they held the dominion over illegal smuggling in Titania Gateway subsector. Both criminal organizations had regular contact with the Tau Empire. From what his agents managed to gather, it was through those organizations that Xenos were sending spies into the Imperial territories. To ensure that the Tau Empire would be blind to Crusade's preparations, he had to place his agents within those organizations and preferably turn Tau spies into double agents who would mislead the Xenos for long enough for Imperial Crusade to gather in force and fall upon them with devastating force. Ottvar would place agents in both organizations, gaining both influence and new agents. After all, there were few criminals who would refuse an offer of an Inquisitor: loyal service in exchange for redacting all of their crimes against the Imperium. He would use those new assets to put both organizations in conflict with the Tau, spread rumors about weakness of the Tau Empire to push corsairs and pirates into attacking Xenos vessels. This would achieve two things. His agents could observe the battles and determine the real strength of the Tau Empire's navy, and if pirates were successful, there was a high chance they would capture some Xenos to be sold on the black market. An easy and quiet way to gather specimens for his xenologists. Finally, Ottvar used his connections to call upon one more asset to ensure his success: Deathwatch. He requested 2 kill teams to be deployed under his command. One was to operate in Grisha subsector, the other in Titania Gateway. With the approval of the entire conclave, 2 Deathwatch teams arrived on Agrellan in short order. Kill Team Nemesis, led by Brother Sergeant Artorius Kane of the Ultramarines, with Brother Tyrion Vandrak of Flesh Terrors, Brother Zachel Ordan of the Nova Marines, Brother Arad Verion of the Mantis Warriors, and Brother Shade, one of the Black Shields. They were specialists in elimination and capture of Xenos leadership in shock assault strikes. Kill Team Aegis was led by Brother Sergeant Chaldean Tyrus of the Raven Guard, with Brother Lysander Thorn of Raptors, Brother Darren Volan of Storm Wardens, Brother Malkor Voss of Scythes of the Emperor, and Brother Falius Verix of the Dark Angels. They were infiltration specialists, striking from their shadows and leaving unseen. Both teams were introduced to the greater scheme. Their task was simple: capture of Xenos specimens, observation of enemy movements, and measuring of the Tau Empire's capacity for war. Both teams were reinforced with Inquisitorial Stormtroopers and Ottvar's agents. Kill Team Nemesis would take Grisha subsector, while Aegis would take care of Titania Gateway. For now, they were to seek targets of opportunity, but be ready to be redeployed if a high-value target would be identified by Inquisitorial spies. With those orders, 2 Deathwatch frigates, Spectral Hammer and Knight's Whisper, jumped into the warp, seeking to accomplish their tasks. With his assets deployed, Ottvar was forced to stay on Agrellan and wait. For now at least, he needed to stay where he was, make sure that his assets were moving according to his will and were well coordinated. Rogue traders especially needed to get used to his presence and authority of agents who would represent him when he would go into the field. It took almost a year before Ottvar was confident enough to let the organization continue running without his direct supervision. More so, his agents needed that year to check upon dozens of leads and rumors. Now, finally, he had something that got his attention. The Tau established a military outpost on the mining world of Garrus. It wouldn't be anything out of the ordinary if not for it seemingly expanding into a proper military base with a big research complex. His spies indicated that the Xenos were researching Imperial technology with clear intention of reverse engineering what they could. This base was not only deemed to be a threat to the Imperium, but the data gathered within could prove useful. Most importantly, however, Garrus was on the border of Imperial and Tau space, with small but not insignificant Xeno naval presence. This would grant Ottvar the opportunity to finally test the might of the Tau naval forces. In this first year there were very few battles between pirates and the Tau Empire Navy. There were only two outcomes of such engagements. Either pirates were overconfident and were ripped apart by the far more numerous merchant fleet, or Xenos jumped away out of the pirates' reach. That secondary information was something he didn't expect, and one that shocked many of his agents. Warp drives had severe limitations in terms of where one could safely exit the warp. Lagrange and Mandeville points to be specific. Places where the gravity evens out or are outside the star's gravity well, just outside the border of a star system. Of course, there were captains who risked exiting or entering the warp within a star system, but such things were done either in emergency or by madmen. One small mistake could cause the ship to be ripped apart as it enters the warp, getting thrown off course and lost in the currents of a sea of souls, or that a vessel jumped out of a warp within a stellar body. The mysterious ether drive used by the Xenos didn't have those limitations. The Inquisition already managed to establish that it was significantly slower than standard warp drive, but that weakness was balanced out by its precision. Vessels with ether drive didn't need to fear the time distortion that is quite common for warp travel. They could also be safely used within a gravity well of a star or even a planet. An advantage that couldn't be ignored by either Inquisition or future Crusade. Thankfully, on Garrus, situation was different. A fleet consisting of 2 light cruisers and 4 escorts remained in orbit. Some of his sources suggested that they were there to keep the secret research base safe and oversee creation of a space station in coming months. This meant that they had orders to hold their position. They wouldn't try to escape this time. Ottvar recalled both Deathwatch teams and contacted House Vorhais. Their task was to secure whatever the Xenos were hiding, but they wouldn't strike at Garrus alone. Through his agents, Ottvar manipulated Obsidian Exchange and few minor pirate groups into launching a combined attack on the mining world. The plan was simple. The pirates take down Tau fleet and distract the Xenos on the surface when the Inquisition launches a precise strike at this enemy facility, securing live specimens, pieces of technology, and whatever useful data that could be acquired. After accomplishing the mission, the enemy base was to be completely destroyed. There were to be no witnesses of the operation. 2 weeks later, Ottvar's personal vessel, destroyer Duty of Martyrs, alongside 2 Deathwatch frigates and rogue trader light cruiser Commerce Lance, arrived at the border of a Garrus star system and remained in hiding outside of the Xenos sensors, awaiting a pirate raid. After a week, the pirates arrived, and Ottvar could witness firsthand a true battle between the Xenos and the scum of the galaxy. The pirates had Xenos outnumbered. A cruiser led the charge, alongside 2 light cruisers and 6 escorts. What he saw was surprising. The Xenos vessels had far superior range to the pirates and could deploy a far greater number of attack craft. They also showed far greater cohesion and coordination compared to their enemies. 2 pirate escorts were ripped apart by the Xenos attack craft before they could fire 1 shot at the enemy. One light cruiser was crippled, and the other badly damaged. The remaining 4 escorts suffered some damage, but were still in the fight. Even the pirate cruiser itself suffered quite a lot of damage, mostly due to a successful torpedo strike to its port side, where the detonation destroyed 2 macro cannons in their entirety. Despite the damage it suffered, it was still the strongest part of the pirate fleet. Without it, the pirates wouldn't manage to break Xenos' defenses. On the side of the Xenos, only half of the fleet was lost. The remaining light cruiser with a pair of escorts suffered significant damage, but were still operational. They abandoned their post and retreated to orbit of the planet's moon. Pirates, battered and bloody, didn't dare to chase after them. Even when wounded, the Xenos warships proved to be tenacious foes. Additionally, the now exposed planet was far more interesting target than fleeing Xenos. And while Ottvar was pleased by the gathered data, as well as impressed by the Tau's skill in naval combat, he was quite irritated by pirates' failure in destroying the Xenos completely. He couldn't commence his mission with those ships sitting nearby. The Tau couldn't find out about Inquisition or House Vorhai's involvement. Irritated, Ottvar decided to attack the remaining Xenos ships himself. They were damaged and exhausted after the hard battle. His fleet, on the other hand, was well rested, well armed, and far better coordinated, compared to the scum Xenos faced before. He gave orders to destroy the light cruiser and one of the escorts outright. The last escort was to be boarded, and additional specimens and assets were to be secured. The battle that happened next was quick and bloody. Damaged Xenos vessels expecting another pirate attack were slow to realize they were fighting a different beast entirely. The light cruiser was destroyed by a precise barrage of torpedoes, and one of the escorts ripped apart by a broadside. The last escort was boarded and in surprisingly short order, completely secured. To Inquisitor's shock, the vessel was mostly automated. Unlike the Imperial vessels of similar size that needed tens of thousands of crewmen, the Xeno escort needed only around a fifth of that. Vast majority of the vessel's systems were operated by automated drones and abominable intelligence. Even the massive guns weren't reloaded by gun gangs, but by great automated, intelligent machines. It was then when the cold realization hit him. Even with the entire Tau fleet destroyed, they lost only a fraction of the manpower that the pirates did. The Tau vessels had their weaknesses. They were slower than the Imperial ships, their firepower was inferior, and armor was thinner. In direct combat, Imperial ships would win every time. But that would ignore their advantages. The amount of attack craft this small fleet deployed was chilling. A great deal of damage dealt to pirates was caused by those small craft. Even the lucky torpedo strike that wounded the cruiser was so successful because Xenos attack craft targeted point defense turrets. Those torpedoes were also impressive. While they had smaller yield compared to the Imperial ones, they were far faster, more agile, and had clearly superior targeting systems. Their fleet was also very well coordinated, and judging by the design and amount of crew, mass-produced. No matter the individual strength of Imperial vessels, quantity had a quality of its own. The orcs taught Imperium that lesson ages ago. And the Tau weren't orcs. They were coordinated and knew how to utilize their strengths. He needed more data, but he knew that time was most likely running out already, and he had no ship that could drag the Xeno vessel through the warp, so he could study it to a greater degree. He ordered the gun crews to reduce the remaining Xeno ship to debris before his task force moved to the planet's orbit, and to do their job. When they arrived in orbit, they found pirates struggling against the planet's defenders. It was one of the reasons why pirates mostly ignored the presence of his small fleet, taking it for another pirate group that arrived late to the party. Normally, they would probably try to attack their rivals, but they suffered enough damage by the hand of the Xenos. Another battle was not in their interests, so they focused on the surface. Minor settlements were easy pickings, but the major cities had Xenos presence, including their anti-air guns, that proved to be very hard to counter. Ottvar sent agents to observe and record pirates' failures. Just as the main force fell upon the Tau secret base. They were well hidden and didn't expect enemy attack, far less one made by Adeptus Astartes of the Death Watch and elite inquisitorial stormtroopers. The skirmish was short. The Xenos fell to the overwhelming and unexpected strike. But credit where credit is due, over a dozen stormtroopers lost their lives and 2 Astartes were wounded, with brother Darren Vollard losing one of his hearts and a lung to a well-placed shot of a crisis battlesuit plasma rifle. It was the first time Space Marines faced against Tau battlesuits. The Marine would survive, but was out of commission for a time. Again, despite the losses his forces suffered, Ottvar was overall pleased. He now had live specimens of 4 main castes, as well as pieces of xenotechnology and a lot of data storage to go through. Kill Team Aegis would need to leave his services for a time. He didn't have facilities on hand to fully heal brother Volarn and make him battle ready. They would need to return to their watch station for that. But this was more of a blessing than a curse. Kill Team Aegis would give a full report to the Watchmaster, and he would take the Tau more seriously. Especially after hearing that Astartes outnumbered Xeno battlesuits 2-1, and yet 2 of them got wounded, one of which suffered significant damage. Ottvar was already preparing to put up a request for establishing a full inquisitorial base of Ordo Xenos in the region, a prelude to creation of a proper watch fortress in Damocles sector. He, Kill Team Aegis and Rogue Trader Light Cruiser left the system shortly after accomplishing their mission. Kill Team Nemesis moved back onto Spectral Hammer and remained in system with orders to observe pirates' progress with planetary assault. A month and a half later, as Ottvar was still looking through gathered data and continued to interrogate the few remaining Xenos, Spectral Hammer returned, carrying interesting news. For more than a month, pirates were in a stalemate with the planet's defenders. All who could retreated to major settlements that held firm against the pirate strikes. Few surprise attacks were launched from the surface with the help of attack craft, striking at the ships in orbit. Despite their best efforts, the pirates couldn't break through the defenses of even one major settlement. They were pushed back each time. Spectral Hammer remained nearby, observing the situation and keeping contact with inquisitorial agents that continued to gather useful data when another Xenos fleet appeared. As they expected, they arrived far later than any warp drive-equipped vessel should, but they did arrive in force and directly over the planet's moon, rather than on the edge of the system. A cruiser, 2 light cruisers and 6 escorts that matched our designs entered the system. They were accompanied by 2 unidentified vessels, one being light cruiser equivalent and 1 escort, that shared some design features with the ships of the Imperial Navy, but on only a superficial level. Seeing this numerically superior fleet, the pirates broke off their attack, leaving much of their ground forces stuck on the planet as they made a run for it. And while Tau ships were slow to pursue, the unidentified ships outmatched pirates' ships in speed and maneuverability. A few precise strikes from a massive ion cannon built into the light cruiser bow damaged pirates' cruiser's engine, making it fall out of formation and into the jaws of a Tau fleet. Out of 7 pirate vessels, only 1 frigate and 1 destroyer managed to escape. The rest fell victim to the Xenos naval forces. They were disabled in short order and given a chance to surrender. Pirates refused and were boarded. Not long after that, boarders retreated and pirate ships were destroyed by concentrated fire. Intercepted communications indicated that boarders went in with intention of saving enslaved civilians. When they managed to do just that, they retreated and pirates were obliterated. Ottvar appreciated the new data, especially that of unidentified vessels, that he identified himself. They belonged to the Mekian Commonwealth, a member state of so-called Tauva coalition, as this was how Tau called the alliance between their empire and their subjects. Mekians were a species of abhumans or mutants that allied themselves with the Xenos millennia ago. They were renowned shipbuilders, and from what he managed to gather, their commonwealth stood directly on the path to the core of a Tau empire. Further investigation of those Mekians would be required in the future. But for now, there was a more pressing matter. The captured data as well as information from interrogations indicated that Coalition had an intelligence gathering base within Imperial space. The task of locating and destroying this base was marked as second-in-line priority task. Why second? Because through the interrogations and research, Ottvar finally realized the importance of ethereals to the Tau. The 5th caste. The ruling caste. Capture of a live ethereal became a priority goal for his agents. But first they had to deal with that secret spy base. His investigation took few months, but his agents finally identified where the enemy established their base of operations. It was on a frontier world of Luminaris. The world was young, but it was to be transformed into a full civilized world within next 4 decades. The decision to colonize it came when navigators managed to map out new stable warp lanes that formed around the time when the warp storm surrounding Damocles sector finally broke apart and disappeared. Luminaris could soon become an important trade hub in the region. The world saw frequent shipments from Arturia, Perfectia, and even Agrellan, which gave Tau Empire a chance to smuggle their agents onto major worlds in the region. Ottvar traveled alongside Kill Team Nemesis to Luminaris in order to personally capture enemy spies. They came in hot, ready for battle, only to be greeted by an image of tied down humans and a female psyker interrogating them right in the middle of a Xenos secret base. To their total surprise, the woman showed them her inquisitorial rosette and introduced herself as Vikola Herat, sanctioned psyker and inquisitor of Ordo Xenos. She was a less known inquisitor who traveled through the eastern fringe of the galaxy. She didn't stay long in any place, and unlike many other inquisitors, kept almost nomadic lifestyle. She was recognized as very talented biomancer and diviner. She came to Luminaris directed by visions of the future and Emperor's Tarot. She foresaw how the human agents present in this base were about to establish contact with the young governor of Luminaris and begin the slow and methodical process of turning him to the Xenos cause. And now that she had contact with objects and humans native to this Tau Empire, her worries only grew. She could sense the threat of this new Xenos Empire. It was right there and then when she offered her full support to Boultic Ottvar. Seeing her resourcefulness and talent, Boultic Ottvar accepted the offer. Even with all the strings he pulled, his resources were stretched thin. Another Inquisitor could prove essential in completing his task. In short order, they transported all prisoners on board of Duty of Martyrs. Well-trained psychers of both Inquisitors went to work, extracting information from captives and, more importantly, reconstructing their minds, transforming them into double or sleeper agents. As the psychers worked, two Inquisitors met in a quiet room and start talking, sharing their information and thoughts. Herat perked up when she heard of Ethereal. One of the captives spoke of someone called Seeker, an Ethereal who would travel, gather information and wisdom, not someone who was directly in power of Empire, but still someone who could be of use to them. Herat immediately pulled out her personal set of Emperor's Tarot. She would read the future and try to find where this Seeker could be found. She started to pull out the cards and looked into the future.
The High Priest, Inversed, the Seeker of Truth, and the One Path. A priest that is not a priest, a teacher who learns before he speaks. The Shattered World, once a monument to glory, now a ruin, a cemetery, a fleeting memory, a world lost, found once more, but not saved. The Inquisitor, Inversed. For all the knowledge and power, the Inquisitor remains blind. A king wearing a fool's crown. His eyes are empty sockets, and will remain so.
The reading of the future wasn't encouraging. especially because of a third card. But they had their confirmation, for both of them recognized the helmet on the second card. It was once worn by the guardsmen of Hoplitia, once a glorious civilized world lost in the grip of a warp storm, cut off from the rest of Imperium, and now reduced to a death world. There they will find the Seeker. There they will find out which one of them is blind.